The rain came down in thin, slanted lines against the wide glass windows of the apartment, blurring the city lights into streaks of golden gray. Eamonn Holmes sat in his armchair, one hand wrapped loosely around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. The room was quiet, too quiet for someone who had spent decades in the noise of studios, cameras, and constant conversation. Silence, he had learned, had a way of forcing the truth to the surface. At 66, Eamonn was no stranger to reflection. Time had a way of sharpening memories, stripping away the gloss and leaving behind something rawer, more honest. And lately, honesty was all he seemed to have left. The headlines had started weeks ago, whispers at first, then louder, sharper, more invasive. Speculation about his relationship with Ruth Langsford, a partnership that had once seemed unshakable, both on-screen and off. To the public, they had been a fixture, warm, witty, dependable. The kind of couple people trusted. But trust, Eamonn thought, was often built on carefully edited truths. He leaned forward, setting the mug down on the table with a soft clink. Across the room, a television flickered silently, a news channel running on mute. He didn't need the sound. He already knew the narrative. Perfect couple no more. Behind the smiles, something wasn't right. He let out a quiet breath, somewhere between a sigh and a laugh. "They've no idea," he muttered. But that wasn't entirely true. People always sensed something, even if they couldn't name it. The pauses that lasted a fraction too long. The smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. The subtle shifts in tone that only became obvious in hindsight. The truth, as it often did, had been there all along, just buried beneath years of routine, expectation, and a shared public image that neither of them had known how to step outside of. Eamonn closed his eyes briefly, and the past came rushing in. It hadn't always been complicated. In the early days, everything had felt effortless. There had been laughter, real laughter, not the polished kind reserved for television. Long conversations that stretched late into the night. A sense of partnership that went beyond appearances. Ruth had been sharp, grounded, and endlessly capable. She had a way of keeping things moving, of bringing order to chaos. Eamonn had admired that. Needed it, even. "You overthink everything," she used to tell him, smiling as she said it. "And you don't think enough," he'd reply, half joking. It had worked, somehow. Two different approaches balancing each other out. But balance, he would later realize, was a fragile thing. The shift hadn't come all at once. It never does. Instead, it crept in quietly, almost imperceptibly. A disagreement here, a misunderstanding there, the kind of small fractures that didn't seem worth addressing at the time. "We'll sort it later," they'd both say. Later, however, has a way of becoming never. Their lives grew busier. Schedules tightened. Public expectations increased. The show had to go on, always. On screen, they remained the same. Polished, professional, in sync. Off screen, something was beginning to unravel. Eamonn remembered one evening in particular. They had just returned home after a long day of filming. The kind of day that left you drained in a way that sleep alone couldn't fix. He had been talking about work, about something that had frustrated him. Ruth had been listening, or at least, she appeared to be. Halfway through his sentence, she interrupted. "Do you ever stop?" she asked, her tone sharper than he'd expected. He paused, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, do you ever just stop?" she repeated, setting her bag down a little too firmly. "Not everything needs to be analyzed to death, Eamonn." The words hung in the air. It wasn't the first disagreement they'd had. But something about that moment felt different. There was an edge to it. A frustration that went deeper than the surface. "I was just talking," he said, his voice quieter now. "And I'm just tired," she replied. That had been the end of it, or at least, that's how it appeared. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. As the years passed, those moments became more frequent. Not explosive arguments, not dramatic confrontations, just distance. Conversations became shorter, silences became longer. The ease they once had began to feel like something they had to work for, and sometimes, they simply didn't have the energy. Eamonn found himself retreating more often. Into work, into his own thoughts, into the comfort of routines that didn't require emotional effort. Ruth, on the other hand, seemed to move in the opposite direction. More focused, more independent, less willing to accommodate the unspoken tensions that lingered between them. They were still together, but they weren't the same. The public, of course, saw none of this. Or rather, they saw what they expected to see. A couple who had built a life together. A partnership that appeared steady, even admirable. People often projected their own hopes onto them, the idea that long-term relationships could remain intact, unshaken by time. Eamonn understood that. He had been part of the illusion himself. But illusions require maintenance. And maintenance, eventually, becomes exhausting. The breaking point, when it came, wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no slammed doors. Just a conversation that had been waiting to happen for years. It was late. The house was quiet. "I don't think we're happy," Ruth said. The simplicity of it caught him off guard. He looked at her, searching for something, anger, sadness, anything that might give him a clearer understanding of where this was coming from. But her expression was calm. Tired, but calm. "I think we're fine," he replied, though even as he said it, the words felt hollow. She shook her head slightly. Fine isn't the same as happy. He didn't respond immediately, because she was right, and that, perhaps, was the hardest part. Back in the present, Eamonn opened his eyes. The rain had eased, leaving behind a soft, steady drizzle. The city lights were clearer now, less distorted. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "It's ugly," he said quietly, echoing the words that had been used in headlines, in conversations, in speculation. But not in the way people thought. There had been no grand betrayal. No single moment that defined everything that had gone wrong. The ugliness, he realized, was in the gradual erosion. The slow loss of connection. The way two people could drift apart without fully realizing it until they were already standing on opposite sides of something they could no longer bridge. It wasn't dramatic. It was human. He reached for the remote and turned the volume up on the television. A presenter was speaking, discussing relationships, public perception, the challenges of maintaining both a private and public life. Eamonn watched for a moment, then shook his head slightly. "They want a story," he said. "Something neat, something they can understand. But the truth rarely fits into neat narratives. The truth is messy, complicated, uncomfortable. And sometimes, it doesn't offer the kind of closure people expect." Later that evening, he found himself scrolling through old photos. Smiles, holidays, moments captured in time that, at least on the surface, told a different story. He paused on one in particular. They were laughing, genuinely laughing. No cameras, no audience, just the two of them. For a moment, he allowed himself to sit with that memory. Not as something lost, but as something that had been real, even if it hadn't lasted in the way they once believed it would. At 66, Eamonn Holmes wasn't looking for perfect endings. He understood now that life didn't always provide them. What it did offer, however, was clarity, if you were willing to face it. And as he sat there, in the quiet of his apartment, he realized that clarity, even when it was uncomfortable, was better than illusion. Because at least it was honest. And honesty, in the end, was the only thing that